Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first time the motion sensors tripped at night, I thought it was a software glitch. By then, I had already been living inside the Monterey Bay Aquarium for 3 weeks, and I knew every sound the building made. I knew the low, steady hum of the life support pumps. I knew the distant, muffled crash of waves outside, pushing into the old cannery foundations. I knew the creak of steel beams when the wind pushed against the glass facade facing Cannery Row. But that night, at around 2:40 a.m., the control screen in the security office flashed a bright orange banner. Motion Open Sea Exhibit Viewing Gallery. I stared at the screen, alone in that room with its gray monitors and silent radios, and for a few seconds I just listened. The pumps kept their rhythm. The emergency lights glowed faintly down the service corridor. The shark tank should have been dead still. No visitors, no staff, just a sealed wing with heavy glass and locked doors. I stood up, the chair wheels squeaking on the floor, and heard something else. A faint, rhythmic ticking in the ceiling duct, like metal expanding and contracting. The air handler for the open sea wing. I told myself it was nothing. Then the sensor tripped again. I did not grab the pistol first. Habit took over, and I reached for the tablet with the camera feeds, fingers swiping through thumbnails until I found the open sea gallery. The image loaded slowly over the internal network, the blue progress bar crawling as if it had all the time in the world. The feed finally popped up. The viewing gallery of the open sea exhibit stretched out, empty. Dark rows of benches, the huge panoramic window just a dim rectangle. Emergency LEDs on the floor cast a soft line along the path where school kids used to sit and stare at sharks and tuna gliding past. Now, there were no sharks. The tank had been drained weeks before. Nothing moved in the frame. I watched for 30 long seconds, thumb hovering above the other angles, cycling through cameras. Main tunnel, side corridor, emergency exit by the stairwell leading to the upper catwalks. No movement, no figures, no shadows crossing the floor. I put the tablet down and finally looked at the pistol lying beside the keyboard. The gun still looked out of place to me there, even after 3 weeks. A Glock 17 9mm 15-round magazine. It had belonged to Miguel, the aquarium's head of security, but now it was mine. I checked the chamber, the way he had showed me on that first day, and heard his voice in my head. "Treat it like it is always loaded, Dan, always." I set it back down. The motion sensor flashed again. This time, I stood up and decided I was not going to ignore it. I was month 1. To make sense of that night, I need to go back to how I ended up here at all, living in an empty aquarium while the world outside fell apart. Before the outbreak, my name tag simply said Daniel Ruiz, Senior Aquarist. My specialty was Elasmo branch husbandry, sharks and rays mostly. I had a doctorate in marine biology from UC Santa Cruz, 15 years working with closed seawater systems, and more hours than I can count spent checking dissolved oxygen levels, salinity, and nitrogen cycles. On the morning everything started, I was in the life support room behind the kelp forest exhibit, adjusting flow rates on one of the sand filters. It was a regular weekday in late spring. School groups had started to arrive at opening time, and you could hear their voices through the concrete walls when a guide talked loudly in the gallery. My first hint that something was off came from my phone vibrating in my pocket, over and over again, more than 50 notifications in a few minutes. Group chats, news alerts, a message from my sister in San Jose. I wiped my hands on a towel, stepped away from the manifold and checked. The first news notification mentioned an unknown pathogen causing sudden aggressive behavior and collapse in several hospitals. Another said flights out of San Francisco International had been suspended. Someone had posted a short video from a freeway where cars were stopped in all directions, doors open, people running on foot. I stared at the footage of a man stumbling between lanes, his clothes dirty, his skin pale. Another person ran toward him and grabbed his shoulders, trying to help. The pale man lunged, knocking them both down. The phone signal cut out after a few seconds. I told myself that videos could be faked, that panicked people misinterpret things. I went back to work. Denial is powerful, even in scientists. 15 minutes later, Miguel came into the life support room with his radio turned all the way up. "You seeing this?" he asked. I nodded, still trying to focus on the flow meter. He tossed me a pair of disposable gloves and gestured for me to follow him. "We need to get everyone together in the briefing room." We gathered in the staff briefing room on the second floor. Aquarists, biologists, educators, maintenance technicians, guest services, kitchen staff. 20-something people, all staring at the flat screen on the wall where a news channel ran with a scrolling banner filled with words that did not feel real yet. Outbreak, quarantine, martial law, unknown pathogen, civil disturbance. Someone muted the volume so we could hear our director, Elena. She stood at the front of the room with a clipboard she was not looking at. "We're closing the aquarium for the day," she said, effective immediately. "Guest services is already stopping new entries. Everyone, please stay calm and follow the safety protocol. We don't know what is happening exactly, but the city has requested that all public facilities close and shelter in place until further notice." Someone in the back asked if this meant an evacuation. Elena shook her head. "Right now, they're saying roads out of downtown are gridlocked. The Monterey Police Department is asking people to stay where they are." My mind split in two. One part of me wanted to get in my car and try to reach my sister. The other, the part that has spent half its life thinking about controlled systems, looked at the map of the aquarium in my head. We had thick concrete walls, heavy fire doors, multiple security gates, a backup generator, a seawater intake from the bay, and tens of thousands of gallons of filtered water in various tanks and reservoirs. We had storerooms full of dry goods for the cafe, walk-in freezers holding fish for the animals, and a complete HVAC system with separate zones that could be shut independently. If you ignore the giant public glass facade facing Cannery Row, the aquarium was basically a fortified bunker sitting on the edge of the bay. Elena turned to Miguel. "Can we lock the building down fully?" "We can close all public entries," he said. "Main doors, side doors, loading dock. Roll down shutters at the ticketing area. Interior gates we can lock mechanically. But the street frontage is mostly glass." "What about the storm shutters?" I asked. Everyone looked at me. "The hurricane shutters for high surf events," I added, suddenly aware I sounded like a nerd pointing out an obscure system during an emergency. "We used them 3 years ago when they were worried about waves hitting the lower viewing windows on the bayside." Miguel's eyes narrowed as he thought about it. "We have steel shutters for the lower-level windows and some of the street side. Not all, but yes, we can close those remotely from the control panel." Elena nodded. "Do it. Close us up." "What about the animals?" Jenna, one of the other aquarists, asked quietly. A question hit me harder than anything else. In the first 12 hours, everything was frantic but oddly organized. The aquarium had emergency procedures for earthquakes, storms, and power failures, and we followed those as best we could, adapting them as reports from outside grew worse. Guest services escorted visitors to the exits as quickly as possible. Some guests argued, wanting to stay inside when they saw videos on their phones of chaos on the streets, but the police at the corner insisted that everyone go home. Within an hour, the building was empty of visitors. The staff split into teams. Miguel and the security crew moved through every floor, locking roll-down shutters, securing fire doors in locked but still safe positions, and checking all emergency exits. Maintenance verified the diesel for the backup generator in the basement, tested the transfer switch, and made sure the seawater intake pumps had redundancy on their power feeds. The animal care team, myself, Jenna, and 3 others, walked exhibit by exhibit, prioritizing systems. We knew that if power went out and did not come back quickly, the animals would be in trouble. Seawater systems for the larger exhibits move thousands of gallons per hour through sand filters, protein skimmers, ultraviolet sterilizers, and heat exchangers. Stop the flow and oxygen levels drop, waste builds up, temperature drifts. We reduced flow rates where we could, shut down non-essential lights, and consolidated some smaller animals into fewer tanks that could be maintained with battery-powered air pumps if everything else failed. Outside, sirens started to become a constant sound instead of a rare one. Around noon, cell service became intermittent. Text messages stacked up and failed to send. News streams paused, buffered, and then stopped entirely. The last clear report I saw mentioned uncontrolled outbreaks in San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Diego. The anchor's voice stayed calm, even as someone ran behind the camera. By mid-afternoon, the police who had been standing at the corner of Cannery Row were gone. Their cars sat empty at the curb. Elena called us all back to the briefing room. "I'm not going to pretend we know what happens next," she said. She had taken off her blazer and rolled up her sleeves. "We have food in the building and water access. We have power for now. Until we know it is safe to leave, I think our best chance is to treat this place as a shelter." "If we stay," said one of the cafe cooks, "how long can we last?" Maintenance stepped in. "The generator has a 1,000-gallon diesel tank. At full load, that is about 3 days. But if we shut down non-essential systems, use only emergency lighting, and switch as many things as possible to battery backups, we could stretch it to a couple of weeks." "A couple of weeks is nothing," someone muttered. I raised my hand, feeling strange doing it like we were in a meeting rather than in the early hours of an epidemic. "We are sitting on tens of thousands of gallons of seawater in the life support system," I said. "We can run that through reverse osmosis membranes for fresh water. We also have multiple storage tanks already installed on the roof and in the basement. If we prioritize, we can maintain drinking water and minimal system flow for months if we find a way to extend the fuel situation." "Elaborate," Elena said. "Most of our big exhibits pull directly from the bay and recirculate. The life support room under the kelp forest has a high-pressure pump and a reverse osmosis unit we use for lab work. It's not huge, but we could set up a routine. Pump seawater into holding tanks, run the RO unit, store fresh water. For energy, we need to keep that pump and the membranes running, but that is less power than running the full building." "What about shutting down some exhibits entirely?" Jenna asked. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "We cannot maintain everything with minimal staff and partial power. Some animals might have to go, so the rest, and we can survive." It was like a physical pain to hear her say it, even though I knew she was right. "We keep the systems that help us live," I said. "Big reservoirs, easy access points, minimal energy demand. The rest we put down as humanely as we can before their systems fail on their own." Silence fell across the room. We were animal people. We had dedicated our lives to keeping living things alive in environments we controlled down to the microgram. Now we were talking about turning off the machines on purpose. Elena looked like she wanted to say something formal and comforting, but the facade dropped. She sat on the edge of the table, shoulders slumped. "Anyone who wants to leave, you can," she said. "I cannot stop you. We will unlock one side door. You can take your chances on the street. Anyone who stays, we commit. We seal this place for at least 72 hours, reassess, and go from there." 5 people left immediately. 2 from guest services, 1 from maintenance, and 2 educational staff. They grabbed backpacks, took bottled water and snacks, and walked out into the afternoon light. We watched them from the second-floor window as they went toward the city, their figures small against the empty street. I never saw them again. We sealed the aquarium that night. Miguel closed the last roll-down shutter along Cannery Row around 8:15 p.m. The thick steel slats rattled as they came down over the glass doors, then locked with a heavy clack. Storm shutters lowered over the lower-level windows facing the bay. The main atrium went from bright glass space to a dim cavern of concrete and steel. Emergency lights glowed at floor level. The upstairs offices and some back-of-house corridors still had normal lights on, but we kept them low to save power. The city outside slowly darkened. By 9:30 p.m., the streetlights flickered and then went out. The aquarium's backup generator kicked in with a heavy thump under our feet. Somewhere in the bowels of the building, diesel burned and spun a shaft that kept our pumps and lights alive. We slept in shifts that night, on chairs and couches in the staff lounge and the conference room. I do not think anyone really slept. Every bump from the building settling, every distant shout or car alarm through the thick walls felt like a potential threat. At around 1 a.m., I heard the first screaming from outside. Not close. Somewhere down the shoreline, echoed off the seawall in the old cannery buildings. Short, intense bursts that rose and then cut off, followed by silence. I lay awake on the couch in the lounge, staring at the underside of a table, and realized this was not going to be over in 3 days. The first week inside the aquarium was a blur of triage. We shut down the most energy-intensive exhibits. The giant open sea tank, the one that had once held schooling sardines, hammerhead sharks, sea turtles, and a large sunfish, was one of the first to go. That decision nearly broke me, but it was unavoidable. The open sea exhibit was a massive closed system that required a huge volume of seawater circulation, constant life support, and a full team to maintain. Without reliable fuel for the generator and with half our staff, we could not keep its conditions stable. A large, unstable tank would become dangerous if it sprang a leak or if the water quality crashed. We moved a few smaller animals to other systems. For the rest, we used an overdose of anesthetic compounds in the water, the same kind used to put fish under for procedures. It was quiet, controlled, and quick. When we shut down the pumps, the big tank went still. We drained it over the next few days into holding reservoirs in the basement, making notes on flow rates, volume, and valve positions like it was any other project. I told myself that the water would not go to waste. It was going to keep us alive. The kelp forest exhibit, on the other hand, we kept running, but at reduced capacity. The tall window that looked like an underwater forest was more than a viewing panel now. Behind it was a vertical reservoir of seawater we could tap if needed. We kept circulation low but adequate. The animals in it, rockfish, kelp bass, and the giant kelp itself, were hardy enough to tolerate some fluctuation. We consolidated smaller tanks from the splash zone and some research labs into a few maintenance rooms where we could run air stones off battery-powered pumps if everything else failed. Some systems we shut down entirely. Every shutdown felt like a failure. But as I walked through the dim galleries, hearing only the sound of water and distant pumps, I also began to think of the building the way I had during that first quick mental calculation. as a machine that could keep humans alive if we used it right. Water first. We reconfigured one of the basement holding tanks that used to buffer intake water from the bay. It had a capacity of 20,000 gallons. Normally, it fed through large-diameter PVC pipes into a set of sand filters and protein skimmers. We rerouted part of that loop into the reverse osmosis unit we had used for lab work. The RO unit was small compared to the system's total capacity, but it could still produce a few hundred liters of fresh water per day if we ran it continuously. We set up a schedule. Seawater intake pumps would fill the holding tank to a certain level. Then we would run the RO unit for several hours, storing the fresh water in smaller food-grade tanks scavenged from the cafe and storage rooms. Salinity, pressure, membrane fouling, I knew all the numbers. It was the first time that knowledge felt like something more than a job specification. It was now the difference between us drinking fresh water or slowly dying of dehydration next to one of the richest seas on the planet. Food, second. The cafe storerooms held bulk rice, pasta, flour, canned tomatoes, frozen bread, frozen pastries, and condiments. The main walk-in freezer had boxes of frozen fish fillets for feeding our exhibit animals. Another freezer held higher quality seafood intended for human dishes. We took inventory carefully, writing everything down in notebooks. Elena assigned ration levels based on a 30-day plan, with the assumption that maybe, just maybe, supply chains would reopen or aid would arrive. That first week, we tried to believe it. By week 2, we stopped talking about 30 days and started talking about later instead. Power third. The maintenance team adjusted the generator's load profile. Non-essential lights went off. Almost all exhibit lighting shut down, except where it was critical for animal health. Office spaces went dark, except for the control room and a few areas we used as sleeping quarters. We did not have solar panels installed on the aquarium's roof. It had been in the planning stage before the outbreak, a sustainability initiative that never got funded. We all cursed that decision more than once. With the load reduced, the generator's fuel estimate stretched from 3 days to around 12 at minimum use. We started planning for what would happen when it ran dry. That is when I first suggested using the tanks themselves, not just as reservoirs, but as parts of a gravity-fed, low-power system that could run even without the generator. It would not be comfortable, but it would keep us alive. We can set up a high tank as a header, I explained to maintenance in the life support room, pointing at diagrams. Fill it while we have power, then let gravity feed smaller lines to taps on lower floors. Use manual valves, no pumps needed during those windows. You want to turn the kelp forest into a water tower? One of the technicians said, half joking. Yes, I said, exactly. They looked at me for a moment and then nodded. In the end, plumbing obeys gravity and pressure. It does not care that the water was once part of an exhibit. By the end of the second week, we had our routines. We woke at 6:30 a.m., gathered in the staff lounge for a simple breakfast, instant oatmeal, coffee brewed on a small camping stove when we wanted to save power. Then teams split up. Animal care checked all remaining exhibits, logged temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and behavior. Maintenance checked fuel levels, mechanical devices, and the generator. Security walked the perimeter, moving through the dim public galleries with flashlights, listening at doors and shutters for any sounds from outside. In the afternoons, we worked on modifications, extra piping, new electrical runs reinforcing doors. At night, we went still and quiet, turning off even more lights and sitting together in a common area with a few lanterns, talking or just listening to the sounds of the building. We quickly learned that silence was important. On the third night, someone dropped a metal mixing bowl in the kitchen. It clanged loudly on the tile floor, rang down the empty corridors, and echoed in the atrium like a bell. 10 seconds later, we heard the first clear sound of the infected close by. Fists, or something like fists, hit the steel shutters along Cannery Row, not synchronized, not coordinated, but driven by some instinctive attraction to sound. A muffled, guttural noise followed, not words, but not animal either. Everyone in the lounge froze. The hitting went on for several minutes, then stopped. We did not speak until 2 hours later, when fatigue finally forced us to move again. After that, Miguel enforced strict noise discipline after 9 p.m. No dropped pans, no dragging furniture, no running downstairs. We moved through the aquarium like we were underwater ourselves, quiet and slow. People broke in different ways. One of the cafe staff, a young man named Trevor, lasted 11 days. On day 12, he announced at breakfast that he was leaving. He said he could not stay in a building full of dead fish and dark corridors any longer. He had family in Salinas, and he wanted to try to reach them. We tried to talk him out of it, but gently. None of us wanted to be the one who said, "You will die out there." He packed a backpack with water, food, and one of the radio handsets. Miguel opened a side fire door long enough to let him out, then sealed it again. We watched from the second-floor window as Trevor walked down Cannery Row, stepping around abandoned cars and broken glass. Halfway down the block, something moved between 2 parked cars. He froze, then turned and sprinted back the way he had come, disappearing around the corner. We did not see exactly what happened, but we heard it. After that, no one else volunteered to leave. By the start of week 3, we were down to 9 people inside the aquarium. Elena, myself, Jenna, 2 other aquarists named Victor and Maya, 2 maintenance technicians, and 2 security officers besides Miguel. 9 people to run a building designed for thousands of visitors and hundreds of life support systems. We adapted, humans do. The decision to drain the rest of the large tanks and shift fully to survival mode came at the end of the first month, when the generator's fuel gauge hit the last quarter mark and stayed there despite our conservative use. "If we assume no more fuel is coming," Elena said in a meeting in the life support room, "then we need a plan for no generator at all. We cannot just keep hoping." I had been working through that possibility in my notebooks for days. I opened one and flipped to a page covered in diagrams. Header tanks, gravity-fed lines, manual valves, RO unit running off a small diesel pump scavenged from the maintenance workshop. And eventually, if we could set it up, a set of small wind turbines on the roof. "The larger systems have to go," I said. "We keep only the kelp forest and some smaller lab tanks. Everything else we convert to raw water storage or drain completely." "No more penguins?" Jenna asked softly. "Their system needs chillers and constant filtration," I said. I felt like I was explaining a math problem to a child, and I hated it. Without power, it will fail in less than a day. If the generator fails and there's a delay in switching to a backup system, which we do not have, they will suffer. I would rather make the decision now than watch it happen later. No one wanted to be the one to say yes, but we all agreed by not walking out of the room. We did what professionals do, even when their personal world is collapsing. We followed procedures as closely as possible. We euthanized animals whose systems we could not guarantee kept detailed records even though we were not sure anyone would ever read them. Every time I wrote "reason," prolonged loss of power anticipated on a form, I was aware that other people might have been writing similar notes in hospitals and labs all across the state if they had time. We dismantled exhibit after exhibit, leaving only a handful running at low power. The aquarium became less like an ocean window and more like a shell. The life inside narrowed to what we could handle. Somewhere in the second month, the power grid outside failed completely. The city went dark and never came fully back. We did not know the exact day the government fell, or if it ever formally did. Radios picked up static and occasional fractured broadcasts. We heard one transmission from a Coast Guard vessel off the coast reporting mass infection in all coastal cities and limited safe harbors. Then nothing. Inside, time became marked by maintenance routines and little human rituals. Shared meals, quiet conversations, short walks along the upper galleries to look out through small, unshuttered windows at the bay. The bay was the only thing that looked almost normal. The waves still broke against the rocks. Gulls still circled overhead. Sea lions still barked from the distant breakwater. Sometimes I would stand at the great tide pool overlook and watch the surface, trying to forget about the dead city behind me. We reached the end of the generator's fuel on day 47. We had stretched those 1,000 gallons farther than any of us thought possible, shutting down everything non-essential, running the generator only during certain hours, and letting batteries carry some loads. But diesel does not last forever, and one afternoon the low fuel alarm sounded for the last time. We used what remained in a planned sequence. First, we topped off every rooftop and basement water tank we had, including repurposed exhibit tanks now connected to a rough grid of pipes. Second, we ran the RO unit continuously for 12 hours, filling every container we could find with fresh water. Trash cans, coolers, plastic storage bins, even clean buckets. Third, we used power tools while we still had them, drilling anchor points on the roof where, if we ever found small wind turbines or solar panels, we could mount them safely. By the time the generator finally sputtered and died, we were ready. The aquarium went into a new phase. Emergency lighting now relied on battery systems only. Many corridors went completely dark. The hum of big pumps gave way to the quieter trickle of gravity-fed lines and the occasional whir of a small diesel engine when we ran the backup pump for the RO unit. We became a small group living inside a concrete and glass skeleton, using its bones for our own circulation. It was around this time that the motion sensors in the open sea exhibit started acting strange. The building's security system had originally been designed to prevent theft, vandalism, and after-hours intrusions, not to warn about infected people trying to break in. It still had door contacts, glass break sensors, and motion detectors in key areas. With fewer people, Miguel had disabled many of the internal alerts to avoid constant beeping whenever someone walked through a protected zone. We kept sensors active only on exterior doors, some internal stairwells, and a few strategic areas like the larger galleries. The open sea viewing gallery was one of those. Even empty, it was a potential vulnerability. It had a secondary emergency exit door leading to a stairwell and 2 internal staircases up to maintenance catwalks behind the tank. The first time the motion sensor tripped late at night, I assumed it was a software glitch. The system had been designed assuming regular maintenance, and we were now patching it with zip ties and spare fuses. When it tripped again the next night, always between around 2:30 and 3 a.m., I paid more attention. On the third night with the same pattern, I brought it up at our evening meeting in the staff lounge. "Maybe it is a loose cable," one of the maintenance techs said. "Temperature changes at night could be flexing it." "Then why is it only ever between 2:30 and 3 a.m.?" I asked. "Temperature here is pretty stable." "Rodents?" Jenna suggested. "We have had mice before in the walls. One runs in front of the sensor, it triggers." "I checked the open baits," Miguel said. "No new signs of activity in that wing. Besides, the sensor field covers the whole gallery. A mouse that small would only set it off briefly. These are 5, 10, 15-second triggers. Could it be the infected? Maya asked. Maybe something is getting in. If something got in that wing, Miguel said, we would have more than one sensor go off. We would see other alerts, and we have had no exterior door breaches. Everyone looked at me. I can go check it next time it happens, I said. I'm awake most nights anyway, monitoring the kelp forest. No, Miguel said immediately. If it is nothing, you are risking yourself for nothing. If it is something, you do not go alone. So, we go in teams, Elena said. 2 people, one armed, one with a tablet. If the sensor trips again, we treat it as a real event until we know otherwise. We all agreed, because that is what people do when they are afraid of losing control. They make rules. That brings me back to that night at around 2:40 a.m., staring at the tablet in the security office while the word motion flashed on the screen. The others were asleep. I was on the late watch that night with Miguel, but he had gone to do a perimeter walk 10 minutes earlier. The radio on the table crackled softly from time to time with static. I watched the empty OpenSea gallery camera feed for another 30 seconds while the sensor alert timer counted down. The system was configured to stop beeping if no further motion was detected for 20 seconds, but every time it hit 19, it reset, which meant continuous motion. Something was moving in there, but the camera was not picking it up. I grabbed the radio. "Miguel, this is Dan," I said quietly. "You copy?" He answered with a whisper. "Go ahead." We have motion again in the OpenSea gallery, continuous. Camera shows nothing obvious. Where are you? On the mezzanine above the main hall, 2 minutes out. Wait for me. I glanced at the pistol on the table. Understood. I will wait. Those 2 minutes felt longer than some of the nights I had spent in the lab during graduate school, waiting for data to finish processing. I listened for any sound from the direction of the OpenSea wing. Nothing but faint air movement and the distant, irregular thump of waves against the foundation. When Miguel slipped into the security office, his face was tight. "Still going?" he asked. I nodded and turned the tablet toward him. The motion alert persisted. The camera feed still showed nothing but the empty, blue-tinted darkness of the viewing gallery. Miguel checked his own pistol, a Smith Wesson M&P, also 9mm. He handed me a flashlight and gestured toward the door. "You stay behind me. If we see anything, you move back. I engage first." We moved out into the corridor, keeping the lights low. The emergency lighting cast just enough illumination to see the floor. Our footsteps were soft on the concrete. The route from the security office to the OpenSea exhibit took us past the central atrium and then down a longer side hallway. Without visitors and exhibit lights, the place felt like a storage facility, not a public attraction. At the entrance to the OpenSea gallery, Miguel held up a hand. The motion sensor control panel beside the door still blinked orange. He used his keycard to unlock the gate, then slowly opened the heavy metal door just enough to slip through. I followed, keeping the flashlight pointed down. The big viewing window loomed ahead, a dark rectangle framed by steel and concrete. We had not completely emptied the tank. A thin layer of water still covered the bottom, a decision made because completely drying it had posed structural risks, but the water was only a meter deep now, and still. We stood there in the faint light from floor LEDs, listening. Nothing moved, no shuffling, no breathing beyond our own. Miguel pointed at the motion sensor mounted high in the corner near the ceiling. It had a small red LED that blinked when it detected movement. At that moment, it was solid. The alert was still active. He whispered, "Sweep left," and walked slowly along the benches, his pistol held low but ready. I stayed to his right, sweeping the flashlight beam ahead of us in a tight cone. We checked under the benches, behind the small kiosk, along the walls. Infected do not hide, at least not in the way predators do. They move toward sound and movement openly. But we had also learned that they sometimes got stuck in corners and kept going into a wall until they wore themselves down. There was nothing and no one here. Miguel stared at the motion sensor again. "Maybe it is faulty," he whispered. "We can disable it from the panel." "Wait," I said. He turned to me. "If it is faulty, why is it only ever at this time of night?" I asked. "We walk past this room all day. We make more noise than ever during the day. The sensor does not trigger then. It always starts around now. Maybe the thermal conditions." He stopped. We both heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound from above. Not from the gallery itself, but from the ceiling area over the tank. A soft, metallic clank every few seconds, like a carabiner tapping lightly against a guardrail. Miguel pointed upward with the flashlight. The beam traced the ceiling, the conduits, the ventilation ducts. The catwalk area behind the tank was not visible from here. There was a solid wall above the window, and the maintenance area was accessible only from a stairwell at the far end of the gallery. He signaled, and we moved toward that stairwell door. The noise continued, soft but regular. Clank, pause, clank. My heart rate picked up. In some part of my brain, I was already cataloging known objects up there. Steel railings, maintenance ladders, hanging hoses, a hoist system we used to lower heavy equipment into the tank. Miguel opened the stairwell door slowly and stepped onto the first step, pistol raised. I followed, the flashlight beam cutting ahead. The stairs were metal, and we moved carefully to avoid extra noise. At the top of the stairs, a maintenance door led to the catwalk that ran along the back of the now mostly empty open sea tank. It was locked with a heavy hasp and padlock. Miguel pointed at the lock, then at the ceiling, where the faint metallic sound was clearer now. Something was bumping gently against steel. He whispered, "This lock has not been opened since we drained the tank." "Could something have gotten in some other way?" I asked. "There's an exterior access hatch up here," he said, "but it is bolted from the inside. We have not touched it." The logical part of my mind started arranging possibilities. Thermal currents causing a loose cable to sway, ventilation fan vibration, a bird that somehow got trapped. Miguel lifted the padlock and inspected it with the flashlight. The metal was slightly corroded, with a thin line of dust around the hasp. It had not been disturbed in weeks. "Whatever is making that sound," he said, "is inside a sealed space." We looked at each other in the dim stairwell, the smell of old seawater and machine oil around us. "Let's go back," he said finally. "We mark this and monitor. I am not opening a sealed area above an empty tank in the middle of the night based on a noise." He was right. It went against every safety instinct we had left. We retreated, closed the doors behind us, and turned the sensor sensitivity down one notch, but not off. That night, I lay awake in my bunk in the converted office, listening to the building's sounds and wondering what else we had missed in its hidden spaces. In the following months, the open sea sensor kept tripping almost every night around the same time. Always a cluster of alerts between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Always nothing visible on the cameras in the gallery. Always that faint, irregular metallic noise if you went close enough to the catwalk stairwell. We adapted to it the way we adapted to everything else, by folding it into our routine. Ghost sharks, Victor called it once at dinner. The spirits of all the animals we had to... He stopped himself before saying kill, replacing it with lose. We all heard the word anyway. I did not like that joke, but I understood why he made it. We needed to turn the unknown into something we could name, even if the name was absurd. The alternative was to dwell on the growing list of things we could not control. Outside, the infected patterns changed with time. From the upstairs windows and the few unshuttered viewports along the bayside, we saw fewer people moving in the streets as the months went on. In the first month, small groups of infected wandered aimlessly, drawn to sounds, sometimes gathering around car alarms or breaking through storefronts. By month 4, the ones we saw were thinner, slower, moving with a strange, stiff gait. The infection did not seem to preserve them. It only kept them moving beyond normal limits. Some collapsed and did not get up again. We occasionally saw uninfected people too. Once, a small group with backpacks and improvised weapons moved quickly along Cannery Row, sticking close to the walls. They passed directly in front of the aquarium's shuttered windows and did not even glance inside. Another time, we saw someone in a small boat moving slowly across the bay, heading north toward Santa Cruz. We never made contact. The risk of opening anything to the outside was simply too high. Inside, our own small population shifted. One of the maintenance technicians developed a persistent cough in month 5, then a fever. We isolated him in one of the former education classrooms, monitoring his symptoms closely. There had been rumors in the early days of asymptomatic carriers, of delayed infection, of airborne spread. His illness turned out to be pneumonia. Without access to a hospital, we treated him with the limited antibiotics we had in the first aid stockpile, warm fluids, and rest. He recovered slowly over 2 weeks but never fully regained his strength. Maya slipped and sprained her ankle badly while carrying a crate of supplies down a dark stairwell. We improvised a brace from neoprene and splints. Injuries that would have been minor in normal times now carried extra weight. A person sidelined for weeks meant fewer hands for critical tasks. Jenna and I spent more and more time together in the life support rooms, adjusting valves, checking membrane fouling on the RO unit, maintaining the gravity-fed loops. In another life, our proximity might have turned into something else. In this one, we shared quiet conversations about pre-outbreak memories and the future in careful, non-committal words. "Do you think anyone is still running research vessels out there?" she asked once as we stood at the great tide pool, watching waves push foam in patterns between the rocks. "Probably not," I said. "Fuel is hard to come by. Crews would be at risk every time they docked." "Maybe there is an offshore platform somewhere," she said. "Something self-contained. Wind turbines, solar, desalination. They could ride this out for years." "They would still need to come to shore eventually for some things," I said. "But yes, it is possible." She smiled faintly. "I like the idea that people are still doing water sampling while the world ends." "So do I said. "Even if it is just one grad student who refuses to stop recording data." We both laughed quietly at that because we knew that used to describe both of us in some way. Year 1, inside the aquarium, was not one long crisis. It was a series of small crises separated by long periods of routine. There was the storm in month 6 that sent huge waves crashing into the sea wall, shaking the building enough to make hairline fractures in some lower-level concrete. We spent a day inspecting every wall and pipe for leaks afterward, sealing small cracks with hydraulic cement. There was the food scare in month 7 when we discovered that one of the dry storage rooms had developed mold due to a minor water leak. We had to discard several sacks of flour and rice, recalculating our rations with a tighter margin. It forced us to get more serious about supplementing our diet with fish and seaweed. Using the aquarium's own tools, we set up a controlled fishing rig off a side access point. a simple hand line with barbless hooks baited with pieces of frozen fish we had thawed. We caught surf perch, rockfish, and occasionally greenling, cleaning them in the former prep kitchen. Out of habit, I still recorded basic data: species, approximate length and weight, in a notebook. We learned how to harvest edible seaweeds from the tide pools, drying them in thin sheets on racks in the sun that filtered through gaps in the shutters. It was not gourmet, but it added minerals and bulk. We experimented with growing small amounts of vegetables in shallow trays under LED grow lights powered by scavenged batteries. The results were modest: some lettuce, a few herbs, but they gave us something green and fresh to eat, which did more for our morale than our calorie count. We never saw large raiding parties or organized groups of infected trying to breach the aquarium. Either our low-noise strategy worked, or we were simply lucky in our location. The thick shutters, heavy doors, and windowless walls on most sides did the rest. Our biggest persistent unknown remained the motion in the open sea wing. By month 8, curiosity had grown into something more like a quiet obsession for me. I could not stop thinking about that sealed catwalk. One afternoon, when things were calm and most people were occupied with maintenance tasks elsewhere, I brought it up to Elena in her makeshift office, formerly the HR department. "I think we should open the catwalk access," I said. She looked at me over a pile of handwritten logs. "Why?" "We have had consistent motion readings there for months," I said. "Always at night, always in the same time window. If something mechanical is failing, we should know. If something is alive up there, we definitely need to know." "What do you think it is?" she asked. "I have worked in this building for years," I said. "Nothing in that space should move on its own. There is no ventilation fan above that point. The hoist system should be locked. If something is swinging or tapping regularly, something is causing it." She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. "Miguel will argue it is not worth the risk," she said. "We open that door, we do not know what we are letting out, or in." "We do it in daylight with a full team," I said. "We are not reckless. But I do not like unknowns above a large open space connected to our main reservoir." She had studied me for a long moment. "Fine," she said. "Bring it up at tonight's meeting. If everyone agrees, we plan it carefully." We chose a clear morning in month 9 to investigate the catwalk. Everyone was involved. Miguel led the team with his pistol and a flashlight. The other security officer stayed at the door to the gallery with a shotgun we had scavenged from an abandoned police car months earlier. A Mossberg 500, 12 gauge, loaded with buckshot. Elena stayed in the security office with the tablet monitoring camera feeds and the radio. I carried a crowbar and a headlamp, along with a tool bag. Jenna brought extra flashlights and a coil of rope. We gathered at the base of the stairwell, the air cool and slightly salty. Miguel spoke quietly, like he did before a complex security drill. "Rules are simple. We open the lock, then Dan goes in with me. We keep our lights low. If we see any infected, we fall back and draw them into the gallery where we have more room to maneuver. No one fires unless absolutely necessary. Shots will draw attention from outside." "Understood," I said. I tried to slow my breathing. Part of me was absurdly worried about finding a raccoon or a seabird that had somehow survived up there for months. Another part of me, the part that had heard screams in the night and pounding on shutters, was worried about finding a human figure pacing blindly back and forth on the catwalk. Miguel inserted the key into the padlock, turned it, and felt the tumblers shift. The lock opened with a dull click. He removed the hasp and pulled the door open a crack. Cool, stale air flowed out. It smelled like old seawater and metal. He looked at me and nodded. "Lights." We switched on our headlamps and stepped through. The catwalk area behind the open sea tank ran along the back wall of the exhibit, a steel grate walkway with handrails overlooking the interior of the tank. Now, the tank was mostly empty, the once deep water reduced to a still, shallow pool at the bottom. The smooth acrylic window that had once been underwater rose several meters above the remaining water line. We moved carefully, our footsteps echoing faintly on the grating. "Straight ahead," Miguel whispered. "Listen for that sound." At first, all I could hear was the faint buzz of my own headlamp battery. Then, there it was. A soft, repetitive metallic knock ahead of us, in the darkness above the center of the tank. Clank, pause, clank. Miguel raised his pistol, and we moved forward until we reached the middle of the catwalk. He angled his light downward into the tank. The shallow water reflected a pale gleam. Nothing moved down there. Then he aimed the beam toward the far side of the catwalk, at the overhead hoist system. That is where we found the source of the sound. A single climbing harness hung from one of the rails, spinning slowly in the air currents. Attached to it was a safety lanyard with a steel carabiner. The carabiner tapped lightly against the rail support every time the harness completed part of its rotation. Clank. Pause. Clank. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Miguel laughed once, softly, without humor. "There is your ghost shark," he said. "Why is that harness here?" I asked. "We put all of them away when we shut this exhibit down." Behind us, near the entrance, Jenna's voice sounded small in the echoing space. "Dan, look at the far end." She pointed her flashlight toward the end of the catwalk near the emergency exit hatch that led to the roof. There, lying against the railing, was a shape I recognized but did not want to see. A human body in a faded blue wetsuit curled on its side. The wetsuit had the aquarium's logo on one shoulder, an old one from before a rebranding we did 5 years ago. The fins still on the feet were worn. A dive knife in a sheath hung from one ankle. I walked slowly toward it, my stomach tightening. "Careful," Miguel said. "We do not know." "We know," I said quietly. If this person was infected and still active, we would have heard more than a harness swinging. The body was desiccated, the skin drawn tight over the skull. Whatever fluid had once given it shape was long gone. The jaw was slightly open, the eyes were dull and sunken. A thin safety line ran from the harness to a ring on the catwalk near the body. The line had slack in it, allowing the harness to swing. It did not take long to reconstruct what had happened. "This is one of the old divers," I said. "Look at the logo. From before we started letting volunteers go into this tank, back when only staff used this rig." "Do you know who?" Jenna asked. "No," I said. "But it is from before my time. 10, maybe 12 years ago. Which means this body was sealed up here long before the outbreak." We all stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soft clank of the harness still spinning. "Maintenance must have forgotten him," Miguel said, his voice low. "Maybe a missing person, a diver who disappeared. They closed the hatch somehow without finding him. Or the investigation concluded he fell into the bay somewhere else," I said. "Bodies in the ocean can be hard to find. If no one thought to check this space thoroughly, then he has been here for a decade, tapping that harness whenever the temperature shifts," Jenna said quietly. "And we only noticed when the rest of the building went quiet. The motion sensor in the gallery below would not have picked up anything from this catwalk normally, but when the harness swung just right, its shadow through the upper windows might have triggered the sensor, or tiny vibrations could have carried into the gallery's field." It was a rational explanation. A sad one, but rational. The mysterious nightly alerts were not caused by some new threat, but by an old human error that predated the outbreak by years. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. "We should bring him down," I said. Miguel nodded. We did it gently. The harness had once been clipped to his safety ring. For some reason, it was now unclipped and swinging while the ring remained on his belt. Maybe he had removed it to turn around and slipped. Maybe he had never fully secured himself. The details hardly mattered now. We wrapped the remains in a clean tarp and carried them down the stairs, moving slowly. In the gallery below, we laid the bundle on a bench. "Do we know his name?" Elena asked over the radio from the security office. "Old wetsuit logo," I said. "Predates most of us. We might find a record in the old incident logs if they are still in the archive." "We should try," she said. "If we are going to bury him, I would like to write something with his name on it." We could not dig in the concrete courtyard. The soil outside the building was difficult to access without exposing ourselves. In the end, we did what people at sea have done for centuries. At dusk, we carried the wrapped body to a service platform above the bay, one of the ones we had used to lower equipment for field work. The tide was rising, waves slapping against the pilings. We stood there quietly, our small group silhouetted against the water. "No speeches," Elena said softly. "We do not know his story. But he worked here. He kept animals alive. That is enough." We tipped the bundle gently over the railing. It hit the water with a dull splash and began to sink. The bay accepted him back without comment. For days afterward, I watched the motion sensors readings. At 2:30 a.m., 3 a.m., there was nothing. No more alerts from the open sea exhibit. In one sense, we had solved the mystery. In another, we had only scratched the surface of the building's long memory. Our empty aquarium held more than just water and equipment. It held forgotten histories, sealed spaces, and mistakes that had outlived their makers. The difference now was that we knew about at least one of them. The end of the first year came quietly. There was no calendar on the wall with red circles. Days had blurred into weeks, weeks into months, marked more by maintenance schedules and seasonal changes in the bay than by numbers. But I had kept careful track in my notebook. On day 365, I stood in the great tide pool overlook and watched the light on the horizon. The air was cool, the sky clear. A few sea otters floated in the kelp beds offshore, grooming themselves. My world had shrunk to the walls of the aquarium, the edge of the bay, and the few streets I could see through limited vantage points. And yet, within that small space there were still details I had not fully noticed before. The way the morning light filtered through gaps between the shutters to catch dust motes in the air, the pattern of condensation on pipes near the RO unit, the exact pitch of the wind when it blew from the northwest versus the southwest. Behind me, footsteps approached. "You are doing the dramatic reflection thing," Jenna said, "overlooking the ocean on the anniversary of the end of the world." "It is not the end of the world," I said. "Just the end of one version of it." She came to stand beside me, hands in the pockets of her fleece jacket. "Elena wants to talk to us after breakfast," she said. "She says she has something we need to hear." "That sounds ominous," I said. "I think it is the opposite," she replied. She smiled when she said it. I have not seen her genuinely smile in months. We went back inside, moving through the now familiar corridors. The smell of coffee greeted us in the staff lounge, the real stuff, not rationed instant. Someone had decided the occasion warranted breaking into a small sealed tin we had been saving. Everyone was there except Miguel, who came in a minute later carrying a small portable radio and an antenna coil. He set the radio carefully on the table. This is why we have a meeting, Elena said. Miguel, go ahead. He cleared his throat, looking more uncomfortable than he had during any security briefing. 3 nights ago, he said. I was on the late watch. We have been scanning the shortwave bands every few weeks just in case. Usually we get static, sometimes old automated weather broadcasts, sometimes nothing. But that night, I picked up something different. He turned the radio on and adjusted the dial. Static filled the room, then gave way to a faint, distant voice on a loop. The signal faded and strengthened as he fine-tuned the frequency. This is the Point Sur coastal relay, the voice said. If anyone can hear this, we are maintaining a safe zone at the former naval facility at Point Sur. We have limited capacity but can provide shelter, medical assistance, and security. Transmission repeats every 30 minutes on this frequency. Stay away from heavily populated inland areas. Approach from the ocean side if possible. Repeat, this is the Point Sur coastal relay. The message cycled, then looped back. Point Sur naval facility was about 25 miles south along the coast, a Cold War listening station built on a rocky point. It had been decommissioned and turned into a historic site years ago. If someone had reoccupied it as a safe zone, they had chosen well. It was isolated, defensible, with clear lines of sight to the ocean. Elena let the message play twice before speaking. I wanted to be sure it was not a one-time thing, she said. They have been broadcasting this on a repeating schedule for 3 nights in a row. That means they have power. They have organization. They have some plan. Or it is a trap, Victor said quietly. A group pretending to be official to lure people in. That is possible, Elena said. But whoever it is, they have a working transmitter, fuel, and enough stability to run a loop like this without panicking. We could respond, Maya said. We have the portable transmitter we took from the marina office. We could tell them we are here. Miguel shook his head. Our antenna range is limited, and we would be broadcasting our position clearly to anyone listening. So, what do we do? Jenna asked. Elena looked at all of us in turn. For a year, we have focused on staying alive in one place, she said. We have turned this aquarium into a shelter, and we have done it well. But we always knew we could not stay here forever. We cannot grow enough food. We cannot maintain these systems indefinitely without outside support. At some point, we either join a larger community or we watch things slowly degrade. Her gaze settled on me. Dan, you said from the beginning that this building could be turned into a platform for survival, she continued. You were right. We are here, a year later, alive, but platforms are meant to connect to other things, not be the only thing. I did say that, I admitted. I am not making a decision for all of us, she said. We are a small group, but we need to start thinking about leaving. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But we should plan. We should scout. We should consider the possibility of joining whoever is at Point Sur, or at least making contact on our terms. The idea of leaving the aquarium after an entire year of turning it into a habitat made my chest tighten. I knew every valve and pump in this building. I knew how long it took to drain the kelp forest to a certain level, how sensitive the RO membranes were to pressure spikes, how to coax a few more liters per hour out of a worn pump. I did not know what waited on the open road beyond what little we had seen from our windows. I'm not going to order anyone to go, Elena said. If we send a scouting team, it will be volunteers only. The aquarium will still be here if they return, but we cannot pretend that staying locked in here for years is sustainable. No one spoke for a long moment. Eventually, Miguel said, If we go, we should go by water. The highway is probably blocked or worse. but we have boats at the marina. Small ones, but seaworthy. We could hug the coastline to Point Sur. We would need fuel, Maya said. Life jackets, emergency gear. We have some of that already, Miguel said, between the fieldwork equipment and what we scavenged from the marina. Elena looked at me again. Dan? My instinct was to say no, to argue that the known dangers were preferable to unknown ones. But I also knew the numbers. I had seen the slow decline of our supplies, the wear on our pumps, the gradual fouling of our membranes. I knew how many times we had patched pipes with tape and clamps instead of proper fittings because we no longer had access to hardware stores. We cannot stay on life support forever, I said. Even the best system needs replacement parts eventually. If there is a functioning coastal relay at Point Sur, they might have access to military stockpiles, technicians, and a larger community. If we never at least try to reach them, we are choosing to let this place become our last station, not a stepping stone. So you would go? Elena asked. I looked at Jenna. She held my gaze steadily, her expression unreadable. I will go if we go by water and if we prepare properly, I said. I am not rushing out there with a backpack and a dream. We plan a route, we test the boat, we set up a fallback plan in case we have to return. But yes, I will go. Jenna nodded slowly. Then I will go too, she said. Someone has to make sure you do not misidentify seaweed and poison yourself on the way. The others laughed softly, the tension breaking for a moment. We did not finalize anything that day. You do not simply walk away from a place that has kept you alive for a year, even if something better might be out there. But something shifted in our minds. The aquarium was no longer just a refuge, it was a starting point. That night, I made one last long walk-through of the building alone after lights out, moving with a flashlight through the galleries that had once been filled with people. In the kelp forest hall, I stood before the tall window and watched the wavering fronds in the low light, the rockfish moving slowly between them. Their world had changed less than ours. In the darkened bay wing, I paused by a small sign that used to explain coastal upwelling to visitors. The words about nutrient-rich waters supporting abundant life felt strange in the quiet. In the open sea gallery, I sat on one of the benches and looked at the empty window. The tank beyond was now just another large reservoir in our survival system. The hoist overhead was still, the harness removed, the catwalk quiet. I thought of the unknown diver who had died there years before any infection. His presence revealed only because the building had become quiet enough to notice his phantom movement. I thought of the sharks and schools of fish that had once filled that space, now gone. This place had been designed to show people a controlled slice of the ocean, a safe way to look at the wild without being in it. Now it had become the opposite. A controlled slice of shelter, keeping us from being fully exposed to a world outside that had become more wild and dangerous than most people could have imagined. I had survived the first year of the epidemic living inside an empty aquarium, using tanks meant for marine life to filter water for humans, using maintenance catwalks as patrol routes, using exhibit rooms as dormitories and meeting spaces. I had learned that systems designed for one purpose can be repurposed in ways their creators never expected. I had learned that sound discipline can keep you alive when noise draws threats like a magnet. I had learned that even in a building full of pumps and pipes, the biggest maintenance challenge is the human mind trying to cope with isolation and fear. And I had learned that no safe place is truly permanent. Every shelter is a platform, not an endpoint. As I sat in the dim open sea gallery on that one-year mark, I felt the building settle around me, the the water in the tanks moving slowly through their loops, the generator room quiet for the first time in my memory here. Out beyond the shuttered windows, the ocean kept breathing against the shore. Somewhere down the coast, a recorded voice repeated on a shortwave loop, inviting survivors to a relay station on a rocky point. Soon, we would answer it. For now, I stood up, turned off my flashlight for a moment, and let my eyes adjust to the faint glow of emergency LEDs reflecting off steel and glass. This was my habitat. I had turned an empty aquarium into a human life support system and lasted a year behind its walls. The epidemic had taken the world I knew, but it had not taken my ability to adapt. When we finally left this place, we would carry that knowledge with us, along with our notebooks, our tools, and whatever hope we still had. If the world was going to start again somewhere, it might as well be from a coast where the tide never stops moving. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.